There is a certain kind of person who can walk into a room and know exactly how everyone is feeling before a single word is spoken. They notice the tiny pause before someone answers, the forced smile that lasts half a second too long, the silence that suddenly feels heavier than it should, the shift in someone's voice that nobody else seems to hear. People often call this empathy. They say you're emotionally intelligent, that you're just good at reading people. But psychology suggests something much deeper. What if this ability wasn't a gift you were born with, but a survival skill you were forced to learn? Because children who grow up in emotionally unpredictable homes rarely get the luxury of focusing on their own emotions. Instead, their nervous system becomes a full-time detective. Is mom angry today? Is dad in a good mood? Should I stay quiet? Should I make everyone laugh? Is today safe? Without realizing it, their brain learns one powerful rule. Other people's emotions matter more than my own. Years later, they're adults, successful, decent, reliable, always knowing exactly what everyone else needs. Yet when someone asks them one simple question, how are you feeling? They freeze. Not because they don't want to answer, because they genuinely don't know. Somewhere along the way, they became experts at reading everyone else's emotional weather. But strangers to their own, stay with me until the end, because one of these signs is so subtle that millions of people mistake it for kindness, never realizing it's actually the fingerprint of a nervous system that learned survival long before it ever learned peace. Imagine growing up in a house where happiness never stayed for very long. One evening, everyone is laughing around the dinner table. The next morning, the entire house feels tense. And nobody explains why. As a child, you don't understand emotional psychology. You don't know about trauma, hypervigilance, or nervous system conditioning. You simply learn one lesson. Pay attention. Pay attention to footsteps. Pay attention to facial expressions. Pay attention to the sound of doors closing. Pay attention to the energy in the room, because if you notice the warning signs early enough, maybe you can avoid the explosion. Maybe you can stop the argument. Maybe you can keep everyone calm. Psychologists call this hypervigilance, a state where the brain becomes constantly alert to emotional danger. At first, it protects you, but the brain doesn't always know when the danger is over. So even decades later, long after childhood has ended, it keeps scanning, it keeps predicting, it keeps watching everyone else, often forgetting to check in with the one person who needed attention the most, you. If you've ever wondered why you always know when someone is upset, yet struggle to understand your own emotions, these next signs may explain more than you realize. Sign 1. You scan the room before you relax. Most people walk into a room and simply exist. They find a seat, join the conversation, and let the moment unfold. But your mind works differently. Before you've even said a word, you've already noticed who looks tired, who's unusually quiet, who's forcing a smile, and who's avoiding eye contact. It happens so automatically that you don't even realize you're doing it. Psychologists call this hypervigilance, a state where the brain constantly scans the environment for emotional changes. It's common in people who grew up in unpredictable homes, where noticing someone else's mood wasn't just helpful, it was necessary. Imagine a child whose parents' emotions changed without warning. Some days, home felt peaceful. Other days, one small mistake could lead to shouting, silence, or emotional distance. That child quickly learns an important lesson. If I can predict their mood, maybe I can avoid the pain. Years later, the environment has changed, but the nervous system hasn't. So even at work, with friends, or during family gatherings, your brain continues scanning every face, every tone of voice, every small shift in energy. People often think you're simply observant, but they don't see how exhausting it is. Because while everyone else is enjoying the conversation, part of your mind is still asking, is everyone okay? Did I say something wrong? Is someone upset? The strange part is that you're usually right. You notice tension long before anyone else does. You sense conflict before it becomes obvious. That's why people often come to you for advice. They feel understood because you notice emotions that most people completely miss. But this ability comes with a hidden cost. After spending so much energy reading everyone else's emotional state, you rarely stop to ask yourself one simple question. How am I feeling right now? Your attention became so focused on everyone else that your own emotions slowly faded into the background. What looks like emotional intelligence today may actually be a survival skill your nervous system learned years ago. And that's what leads to the second sign. Sign Nash 2. You feel responsible for keeping the peace. Have you ever walked into a room where two people were upset with each other and somehow felt like it was your job to fix it? Maybe nobody asked you to. Maybe the conflict had nothing to do with you, yet you still found yourself trying to calm everyone down, changing the subject, making a joke, apologizing first, or saying yes to something you didn't even want, just to keep the atmosphere peaceful. To most people, this looks like kindness, but psychology suggests it can come from something much deeper. When a child grows up in a home filled with emotional tension, they quickly learn that conflict feels dangerous. An argument doesn't just sound loud, it feels unsafe. So the child's brain begins searching for ways to stop the tension before it gets worse. They become the peacemaker, the quiet one, the responsible one, the one who keeps everyone happy. Over time, this stops being a choice. It becomes an identity. Even as an adult, your nervous system still believes, if everyone else is okay, then I'll finally be okay too. That's why you often absorb responsibilities that were never yours. If a friend is upset, you immediately wonder how you can fix it. If your partner seems distant, you assume you've done something wrong. If two coworkers are arguing, you feel uncomfortable even though you're not involved. Your brain has been trained to believe that other people's emotions are somehow your responsibility. The difficult part is that this habit slowly disconnects you from your own needs. You're so busy keeping everyone else comfortable that you forget to ask whether you're comfortable. You become the person everyone relies on, the one who listens, the one who understands, the one who always knows the right thing to say. But very few people realize the one who keeps the peace is often carrying the most invisible stress, because you were never supposed to carry everyone else's emotional world. You only learned to because, at one point in your life, it felt like the safest way to survive. And that leads to signs 3. You notice changes in other people's mood long before you notice your own. Someone walks into the room a little quieter than usual, and you notice it immediately. A friend replies with a shorter text than normal. You sense something is wrong. Your partner says, "I'm fine," but something in their voice tells you they're not. It's almost as if your brain has a built-in emotional radar. People often admire this ability. They say you're incredibly intuitive, that you're good at reading people. And you probably are. But here's the question. How quickly do you notice when you're the one who's hurting? For many people who grew up emotionally hypervigilant, the answer is not very quickly. Psychologists explain that when a child's safety depends on understanding other people's emotions, the brain naturally gives those emotions higher priority than its own. Your attention is always directed outward. How are they feeling? Are they upset? Do they need something? Meanwhile, your own emotions quietly wait in the background. That's why people like this often don't realize they're overwhelmed until their body forces them to stop. They suddenly feel exhausted, burned out, or emotionally numb, without understanding why, because they spent weeks noticing everyone else's stress, while completely missing their own. The strange part is that if someone you love feels sad, you notice it within seconds. But if you're sad, you might not recognize it for days. You simply tell yourself, "I'm just tired. I'm just busy. I'll deal with it later." Eventually, later becomes months, then years. This is why many people become experts at understanding others, while remaining strangers to themselves. The ability to read emotions is a beautiful strength, but only when it includes your own. Because if your emotional radar only points outward, you'll always know when everyone else needs care, and never realize when you do. Sign 4. You apologize even when nothing was your fault. Have you ever caught yourself saying, sorry, even when you didn't actually do anything wrong? Someone bumps into you. Sorry. A friend is in a bad mood. Did I do something? A conversation suddenly becomes awkward. And somehow, you feel responsible. To other people, this can look like good manners. But psychology often sees something deeper. When children grow up in emotionally unpredictable environments, they quickly learn that taking the blame can sometimes reduce conflict, even if they weren't responsible. Apologizing felt safer than arguing, safer than being misunderstood, safer than risking someone's anger. Over time, the brain forms a quiet belief: if something feels wrong, it must somehow be my fault. That belief doesn't disappear in adulthood. It follows you into friendships, relationships, even the workplace. Someone gives you a cold reply, and your first thought isn't, maybe they're having a difficult day. Instead, it's, what did I do? You replay conversations, you analyze your words, you search for mistakes that may not even exist. The truth is, not every silence is about you. Not every bad mood is your responsibility. And not every relationship problem begins with something you did. Sometimes people are simply tired, stressed, distracted, or fighting battles you'll never see. Learning this can feel incredibly uncomfortable because your nervous system spent years believing that taking responsibility kept you safe. But real emotional maturity begins when you realize something powerful. You can care about someone's feelings without carrying the blame for them. And that's when your attention slowly starts shifting from managing everyone else's emotions to finally understanding your own. Sign 5. You feel guilty for putting your own needs first. When someone asks you for a favor, your answer is almost always, sure, even when you're exhausted, even when you're overwhelmed, even when every part of you wants to say no. And if you do say no, the guilt arrives almost immediately. You start wondering, was I being selfish? Did I disappoint them? Are they upset with me now? For many people, setting a boundary is uncomfortable, but for someone who learned to predict everyone else's mood before their own, it can feel almost impossible because somewhere in childhood, your brain learned a dangerous equation: keeping other people happy equals staying emotionally safe. If everyone around you was calm, you could finally relax. If someone became disappointed, your nervous system treated it like a threat. So you learned to put your own needs aside, not because you didn't have any, but because everyone else's always felt more urgent. As an adult, that pattern quietly follows you everywhere. You become the person who stays late to help, the one who always checks on everyone else, the one who listens for hours, even when no one asks how you're doing. People admire your generosity. They call you selfless, reliable, and you probably are. But kindness should never require abandoning yourself, because every time you ignore your own needs, your nervous system receives the same old message: everyone else comes first. Over time, that creates a painful habit. You become incredibly good at taking care of others, while becoming completely disconnected from taking care of yourself. The truth is, setting a boundary doesn't make you selfish. Saying no doesn't make you a bad person. And choosing yourself once in a while isn't a betrayal of others. It's the beginning of rebuilding the relationship you've neglected for years. The relationship with yourself. Because after spending so much of your life protecting everyone else's emotional world, you deserve to feel safe inside your own. Sign 6. You feel anxious when someone says, "We need to talk." For most people, it's just a sentence. "Can we talk later? I need to tell you something. Can we meet for a minute?" But for you, those few words can change your entire day. Suddenly, your mind starts racing. Did I do something wrong? Are they upset with me? Did I miss something? Within minutes, you've imagined 10 different conversations, most of which never happened. Psychologists explain that this is common in people whose nervous systems became conditioned to expect emotional unpredictability. As a child, difficult conversations often meant criticism, conflict, or emotional distance. So your brain learned to prepare for the worst before it happened. Today, even a harmless message can activate that same alarm system. Your heart beats a little faster. Your stomach feels tight. You replay your recent conversations, searching for mistakes. The strange part is, most of the time, the other person simply wants to ask a normal question. But your brain isn't reacting to the present. It's reacting to the past. Your nervous system is trying to protect you from pain it experienced years ago. The problem is that living in constant anticipation keeps you from enjoying the present moment. Instead of responding to reality, you're responding to possibilities. And those possibilities often become far more frightening than the truth itself. Real healing begins when you remind yourself of something simple. Not every conversation is bad news. Not every pause leads to rejection. And not every unknown situation is a threat. Sometimes, it's just a conversation. Sign 97. You struggle to answer the question, what do you want? T sounds like one of the easiest questions in the world. What do you want? Where do you want to eat? What movie do you want to watch? What career do you actually want? What kind of life would make you happy? But instead of answering, you hesitate. Your first instinct isn't to think about yourself. It's to think about everyone else. What do they want? What would make them happy? I'm okay with anything. If this happens often, it isn't because you're indecisive. It's because, for years, your own preferences were pushed into the background. When you spend your childhood focused on managing other people's emotions, you don't get many opportunities to ask yourself what you feel. Your brain becomes so practiced at reading everyone else that it slowly forgets to listen inward. As an adult, this shows up in surprising ways. You let other people make the plans. You avoid expressing your opinions. You convince yourself that it doesn't really matter what you want. But deep down, it does. Because every time you ignore your own voice, you move a little further away from yourself. Psychologists often say that a healthy identity is built by knowing your own needs, values, and boundaries. If you've spent years putting everyone else first, that identity can feel blurry. The good news is, it isn't gone. It's simply been quiet for a very long time. And learning to hear it again doesn't start with life-changing decisions. It starts with small ones. Choosing what you want to eat, what you enjoy, what you need. Because after spending so many years predicting everyone else's emotions, you deserve to become curious about your own. Sign 8. You mistake hypervigilance for empathy. People have probably told you your entire life. You're so empathetic. You always know how other people feel. You understand people better than anyone. And maybe that's true. But here's what psychology wants us to ask. Is it really empathy? Or is it hypervigilance? There's an important difference. Empathy is the ability to understand someone else's emotions. Hypervigilance is the need to constantly monitor them. One comes from connection. The other often comes from survival. If you grew up in an emotionally unpredictable environment, your brain learned that paying close attention to other people's moods could keep you safe. So you became an expert at reading facial expressions, changes in tone, body language, even silence. But somewhere along the way, your nervous system stopped asking, how are they feeling? And started asking, are they safe for me right now? That changes everything. Because you're not just understanding emotions, you're constantly scanning for danger. You walk into a room and immediately notice who's stressed. Someone sighs, and your attention shifts toward them. A friend replies with a shorter text, and your mind starts wondering if something is wrong. It feels like empathy. But sometimes, it's your nervous system, refusing to stop searching for emotional threats. The difficult part is that this can become exhausting. You absorb other people's stress. You carry emotions that don't belong to you. You leave conversations feeling emotionally drained, even when nothing bad actually happened. Real empathy allows you to understand someone's feelings without carrying them home. Hypervigilance makes you feel responsible for them. Learning the difference is one of the most important steps in healing, because you can still be a deeply caring person without turning everyone else's emotions into your personal responsibility. Your sensitivity isn't the problem. The problem is believing you must constantly stay on guard. And when that guard finally begins to come down, something surprising happens. For the first time in a long time, you finally have enough emotional space to notice the one person you've been overlooking all these years, yourself. Sign 9. You don't know how you feel until it's too late. Ask yourself one simple question. How are you feeling right now? Not what you're thinking, not what you're doing, not how everyone else is feeling. You. For many people, the answer comes naturally. But if you learn to predict everyone else's mood before your own, this question can feel surprisingly difficult. Not because you don't have emotions, because you've spent so much of your life ignoring them. You notice you're exhausted only after you burn out. You realize you're hurt only after you pull away from people. You discover you're overwhelmed only when your body finally forces you to stop. For years, your attention has been directed outward. Your brain became so busy reading everyone else's emotional world that it forgot to check in with its own. Psychologists sometimes call this emotional disconnection. It's not that your feelings disappeared. They were simply pushed aside because they didn't seem as important as everyone else's. As a child, this made sense. If your environment felt emotionally unpredictable, paying attention to your own feelings didn't help you stay safe. Paying attention to everyone else's did. But adulthood asks something different from you. It asks you to become your own safe place. That starts with noticing your emotions before they become anxiety, before they become resentment, before they become complete emotional exhaustion. The truth is, healing doesn't begin when you become better at reading people. You're already good at that. Healing begins the moment you turn that same attention inward. When you stop asking, how is everyone else feeling? And begin asking, what do I need right now? At first, the answer might feel unclear. That's okay. You've spent years listening to everyone else's emotional voice. It takes time to hear your own again. But every time you pause, every time you acknowledge your own feelings, you're teaching your nervous system something it may have never learned before. Your emotions matter. If you recognized yourself in several of these signs, it doesn't mean something is wrong with you. It means your nervous system became incredibly skilled at surviving an environment where emotional awareness wasn't optional. You learned to predict moods, avoid conflict, keep the peace, and understand people long before they understood themselves. Those abilities are real strengths. But they came with a hidden cost. Somewhere along the way, you became fluent in everyone else's emotions, while forgetting your own. The beautiful part is that survival patterns are not life sentences. The brain can learn new patterns. Your nervous system can learn that you no longer have to stay on guard every moment of the day. You don't have to earn love by managing everyone else's emotions. You don't have to carry responsibilities that were never yours. And you don't have to abandon yourself just to keep the peace. The greatest transformation isn't becoming better at reading people. It's finally becoming someone who can read themselves with the same patience, the same compassion, and the same understanding you've always given everyone else. Because the moment you stop living as everyone else's emotional protector, you finally become your own. If this video resonated with you, let me know in the comments which sign described you the most. And if you want more psychology content that helps you understand yourself on a deeper level, subscribe to Psychology Origins. Until next time, take care of your mind, because it has been taking care of everyone else for far too long.